Why does Bitcoin have value? Well, because in part, we accept it as money. Like there is a social element to money, but that's not the whole of it. And they mistake it as like the whole of it, that's all that money is. That's a part of what money is, but it's more than that. And the other reasons Bitcoin has value are because of its inherent objective qualities, such as its decentralization, such as its ability to transfer and store. Like those are not constructed, those are real realities, and they're part of what gives it value. But so fiat becomes a natural money under a society where the very notion of truth and the very notion of objective reality becomes chipped away at, questioned, and dismantled until you have a crisis of faith. And what is the crisis of faith in? The crisis of faith is in, belief itself. There is a question of belief itself. And so fiat becomes the natural money in that, because it is a nihilistic money. It is an arbitrary money. It is a money that says none of this is real. Money is balance sheet points. It's MMT, right? It's just accounting points. And we create it at whim to service what is effectively central planning objectives.
100%, 100%. And CK, general manager of Bitcoin Magazine, good friend of mine, the analogy, the way that he described it, I want to get your thoughts on this, Jesse, is Bitcoin changes your operating system. What he said, he's like, look, Bitcoin fundamentally changes your operating system. And people that are still on the fiat operating system, they're on a nihilistic operating system. They're on a materialistic operating system. They're on an operating system that's inherently disconnected from reality, unlike Bitcoin that is connected to reality via proof of work, right? Is anchored to the universe, to energy. And it completely changes your perspective on life. And then all of a sudden, the different ideological beliefs don't matter anymore. The Bitcoin becomes the great unifier. And I've seen hardcore libertarian Bitcoiners get along with hardcore socialist Bitcoiners, and they get along because they have that common denominator, and that common denominator is Bitcoin.
And so I think that what CK was getting at about how it changes your operating system, that's the core of it, is that the norm is living on an inflationary unit of account. And that creates this flywheel constantly of things get worse over time because a dollar gets you less. And so producers, to keep their costs, have to cut their inputs, cut the quality of their goods. That's where shrinkflation comes from. It's why service seems to get worse over time, because businesses are trying to get by with the same costs when all the costs around them are going up. That's an inflationary world. Everything gets worse. And that's especially felt when it comes to craftsmanship, in the built environment, and when it comes to art and quality of goods as well. A kitchen appliance, a fridge from the 1950s can still work. And, nowadays we have planned obsolescence in our appliances because we need to feed the fiat machine. And so you have to keep purchasing things. So going from that norm, which creates this nihilism and defeatism, really, especially in younger generations, you can't buy a starter home here in Los Angeles is $1 million. That's pretty backbreaking for a young person. And so what do you do instead? You orient your life around experiences. You go to Coachella, and that costs $1,000 rather than $1 million. And you make that your identity, but then you're living for the moment. That's fiat world. And then when you make this transition to Bitcoin world, now you're on a deflationary standard. Your money gets more valuable over time. It can buy you more goods in the future than it can today. And that changes everything. And it's this really hard process. It's a bumpy process. There's a lot of personal volatility and tension and cognitive dissonance as you go through this transition from fiat world to Bitcoin world and embrace this deflationary unit of account. the result of that is like in a deflationary world, goods get better over time in the same way that goods get worse over time. And when you're using an inflationary unit of account, goods get better over time with Bitcoin. So, and that happened on the gold standard. That happened, we had 150 years in the US after the American Revolution up until the creation of central banking. In that window, prices were stable, but because it was all pegged to gold, the value of the price of everything was relatively stable for 150 years. But during that, you have technological deflation, as Jeff Booth would point out. So the ability to create goods gets cheaper. It's easier to create goods, but you want to keep your prices the same, so you make those goods better. And so everything gets better over time on just a gold standard, which is flat. And here's Bitcoin, where it's a massively deflationary standard. That's going to be an incredible thing for the world, even though it's really bumpy to transition from this worldview of nihilism and chasing for the moment and living for experiences, and shifting towards a future-oriented worldview where you're planning, you're saving for the future because you know how much it's going to be worth in the future. And that's how humanity should be. That's investing on an individual scale. That's a good force for humanity and for the world in general. I just think about the Bitcoin future as this bright, glowing, sunlit place that is full of hope and optimism and prosperity and planning for the future.